Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're joining us here today. My name is Frank Jaskulke. I'm the VP of Sales and Business Development at AVO Medtech. And I've had the good fortune of working with startups in medtech for about 22 years now. And many of you here and many others have been kind enough to share their experiences, their knowledge, their mistakes. And over the years, I started jotting them down because I saw patterns. There were common mistakes. That turned into a presentation that I've been giving for 15 years now called 10 Common Mistakes in MedTech and What You Can Do About It. Lately, we got some suggestions from people who are attending the other webinars for some additional mistakes, some other things to watch out for. So kind of like there was Weekend at Bernie's and then Weekend at Bernie's 2, this is 10 more mistakes. So let me pull up presentation and we'll get chatted. And as we're going through this, feel free at any moment, if you have a question, just throw it in the chat. That'll be the easiest way for me to see what questions you have and try to respond to them. You might see my head turning a little bit because I've got chat over on the other windows. So if you do have a question, I can pop it up quickly and answer it. And then note, this is being recorded. You will get the recording of the presentation. It's usually the most common question we get. You'll get it right after the webinar ends. It gets processed and then will be emailed out. And with that, we're going to talk about 10 more mistakes, and more importantly, what you can do to try to mitigate or avoid those mistakes. So here are the 10 we're going to talk about. These are additional mistakes that many of you had shared, challenges you've observed over and over again, and talked through ways that you've dealt with them. And I appreciate you sharing that knowledge. So we'll jump right in. The first one, and a common one I see with very early stage startups, and often with like physician founded startups, is confusing physician enthusiasm and purchasing. Now, when you're starting a company, in med device, you might be years away from sales and you're trying to get signal for, is there a market? Should you pursue this? And if you've seen the other presentation, market validation is the thing we argue is the most important. What you don't want to do is over-index on a handful of very passionate physicians who really believe in your product. That's important, but it does not necessarily mean you will make it into a sale and actually get the product adopted, right? So what we advise to companies is to make sure you map all the stakeholders. Physicians as an end user are critical. If there's not clinical value, if they don't believe in it, you shouldn't advance. But if they do believe in it, now you've made one step. There's going to be administrative and financial decision makers. There might be a VAC. That doc might be part of a practice group, not an employee of the hospital. So you've got to make sure you've mapped out that entire purchasing process. And the earlier you can understand that, and by early, I mean like idea and concepting phase even, the better decisions you can make in product development, in regulatory, in financing strategy, in the entire business. You may find there are simple changes you could make that would make it easier for your product to be purchased and drive sales a lot faster when you get there. And remember, sales cycles in medtech are long. They can be up to 2 years, especially when you're a new company without a brand and people don't know you, right? So simplifying that process by understanding the stakeholders and optimizing for it creates a ton of value in your business. Second one, neglecting IP strategy. Now, you would think, given how important IP is in medtech, that this is a problem that would never come up, but it does quite often. It's not that companies forget to file a patent at all. No, they usually do. It's that they're not thinking about an IP strategy early on and imagining the things they're going to need to do in the future, the costs they're going to bear, the timelines they run into, and trying to optimize. It's not that you need to know every detail right at the beginning, but you should spend a bit of time thinking about where you're going as a business, where the technology could go, And then how should you build IP around that? When should you be filing your international patents? Should you be getting multiple patents? Should you be looking at a wider array of coverage in your patents? But thinking about that just a little bit early on can save you a lot of money and, more importantly, create a ton of value when you get to exit. Third one, we see a lot of companies where they rush forward in building their business, building the strategy before they've validated the pathway. Uh, there are a lot of ways to get marketing authorization, right? 510K, PMA, de novo, class one that's exempt, all kinds of things. But you should validate what is the right pathway for your business. What are the claims you need to make to have a product that will get adopted? We sometimes get approached by companies who will say, like, hey, we want the simplest, lowest cost path to marketing authorization today, and we'll expand later. Now, that may be the right strategy, but usually companies are approaching us with that strategy because they're trying to save money. They're not thinking about what it costs. Hey, what will it cost to do those studies later on? To do a second 510K filing, to do letters to file and have to maintain them, right? Thinking through what is your market and what claims does it require, then working backwards to say, okay, this is the evidence I would need, and this is the appropriate regulatory pathway, then making a decision about, do you want to take a simpler, cheaper pathway, but you pay more later? Or do you want to go for that pathway now? Be thoughtful and do the assessment early on before you're committing to your design, to your testing, to all those other things, that the further down you get, the more you're kind of locked into a path. A related one is we see companies where they kind of just default to 510K and they don't evaluate the alternatives that they have, including de novo. Um, De novo, it's not easy, but it's not hard. You're not doing a PMA, right? You're going to have to do some studies probably. You're going to have to develop more evidence than you might with a 510K. But hey, the flip side of that is you're going to have more evidence that can be used by your sales team to drive adoption of the product. And you've now set the standard for which your competitors have to follow, right? You get to be first in market and decide with the FDA what the barriers are going to be for followers behind you. So it's not that 510K is the wrong answer, but it shouldn't be a default answer. The default answer should be, what does the market need to adopt your product? And what is the most appropriate and efficient way to get there? 510K, de novo, exempt, PMA, whatever it might be, that will ultimately be your lowest cost, fastest time to value creation. And remember, the goal is not to get on market. The goal is to get adoption that benefits patients and creates economic value. Kind of related to that is designing for manufacturing. 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, DFM started to get talked or was starting to be talked about a lot more. And I'd say companies, by and large, we see startups, they're thinking about it, but they're not necessarily thinking about scale. And it's not that you need to have a manufacturing process that day one when you launch is ready to go to a bajillion units. No, you can't afford that. You can't justify that. But you can put some thought into what are the transitions you're going to have to make, and are there things you can do now that would simplify those transitions? I've seen products where, frankly, they're overly complex. They've been in prototype stage and they sort of bring that prototype forward, and they get a product that, even at low volumes, is complex to make, has a lot of rework, a lot of waste. And if you scale that up, it doesn't get much better. If early on you start making some design decisions to think about, how do we simplify this? How will we make it easier? Your scaling is going to be easier. And that value that you get as you get bigger, you'll capture at a lower cost, giving your investors a better return and making your life a lot easier if sales take off like you want them to. All right, then let's talk about commercial and go to market. You've made it on market, you've got marketing authorization. What are the things we start to see here? When we did the original presentation, a lot of it was pre-market. Seen a lot more now where post-market things that come up. First one is we see companies not think about what it means to be post-market or to be on market. Pre-market, companies are very R&D centric, right? They're doing development, they're doing regulatory, they're doing testing. They get on market, and we often see companies and they make this big shift. Now all the energy is commercial. That's great, but you're going to start getting customer feedback. You may get complaints. When you go from making 1 unit to 10 to 100 to 1,000 units, there may be problems that emerge in your quality system, in your manufacturer, in your supply chain. If you don't have infrastructure in place to handle those sorts of activities, one complaint, one problem on manufacturing could stop the whole company. I've seen companies where they get customer feedback that they need to respond to. They don't have the systems in place, and it just kind of grinds the company to a halt. They were all focused on sales, and boom, they've got to stop. So putting in some of that infrastructure, right, making sure you have a good quality system, you have the right SOPs, you have a team of people who know what they're doing and can handle those complaints, can handle the feedback, can manage supply chain so that you can focus on sales and growth. So that when there is an issue, you're able to manage it, not stop all your other work. Related to that, we see companies that I would argue they wait too late to start commercialization, right? Pre-commercial, pre-FDA clearance or approval, you can't sell or market your product, right? You can't introduce it into interstate commerce. But there are a lot of things you can do to seed the market, to prepare, and to make your life a lot easier when you do launch. These are things like building out the KOL relationships, developing the economics narrative and testing it, starting to map out where you should put sales reps or distributors and build those relationships. It's also you can be at the medical meetings, then you can be getting feedback, doing focus groups, building relationships. You can gather a lot of information. And you can be building the system such that on the day you get clearance or approval, you've got team ready to go out and to sell. Now, yes, that has a cost. That for a small startup that is struggling on financing, that can be hard. That's where often the CEO, the founders have to get really scrappy. You're going to be the ones probably doing that early work, doing some of those things while you're still pre-commercial, setting the stage for when you launch means you won't have to start day one when you get clearance and spend the next 6 to 12 months building the infrastructure, setting the stage, setting the system while you're burning cash. Related to that, we see, especially when we talk with like software as a medical device companies, they'll get stuck in pilot mode. They're able to get a hospital or a clinic to do a pilot to try out their product, but they don't have a mechanism to convert that pilot into a real customer. And so if you're giving them discounts or some other better terms for doing the pilot, you may be just setting yourself a lower price, right? So yes, getting pilots so you can get real world feedback, you can get some revenue, fantastic. But you can build into those pilot agreements conversion terms, things that say like, hey, here's what commercial terms would look like when we get to that point. Or, hey, here are conditions that if we meet them, you agree to adopt the product or to start the negotiations or to expedite a process or whatever it might be, right? Just because they're doing the pilot and maybe even paying you for a pilot doesn't mean you can't try to set the stage for if we deliver on what we believe that we will, if we show you value, that you will come back and be a customer. Don't wait until the pilot is done, it's gone well, and now they can just go, well, we'd like to continue, but we don't want to pay more, right? Do that up front. Related to that, if you go way back in time, you only got a little bit of money. Um, we often see companies where they underestimate the true cost of developing a product. I see so many startups where they're like, all we need is $5 million and we'll be on market. It does happen. It does. But the data is really clear. Most of the time, it's a lot more money than you think and takes longer than you think. Companies, they'll put in a bit of a budget around like, hey, if things don't go perfectly right, here's 10% here, here's 20% there. But what they usually are missing is all of the work that's going to have to be done in order to generate the evidence, whether it's clinical or bench, to drive adoption, right? Developing the product is one thing. Developing a product that clinicians and hospitals will want to adopt and payers will want to pay for is a very different thing. So this ask on here is just be honest, be truthful about all the things that are going to have to go into it. And if you've not done it before, if you've not brought a device from concept all the way to commercialization, go and talk to people who have and ask where it went wrong, what they wish they knew. Get help from folks who have done it before to build robust models. It'll make you more interesting and attractive to investors, and you'll have fewer surprises, not no surprises, but fewer surprises along the way. Um, I talk to a lot of companies that still think the EU process or the CE marking process is easier, which surprises me because it's been a decade since the changes and really it flipped to US being probably a faster, more predictable pathway. But also, I see companies where they assume it's just so similar that whatever they've done on one side, they just have to do a few little things on the other side and they'll be on market in the EU. And while the processes have harmonized quite a bit, especially this year with the change from QSR to QMSR, they aren't totally the same. They have different standards, they have different risk levels. If you know you're going to be going onto the European market, then think about early on what are the requirements for both FDA and for the EU process, and try to understand if there are things you could be doing now that would make your life a bit easier when you do get to that other market, right? A little bit of planning now, you might do a bit of more testing or a little bit different testing. You're going to get a lot easier process when you get there. So all of these things sort of compound. Um, we see companies where they've made market mistakes, they've made regulatory mistakes, they've made commercial mistakes, and that results in timelines being a lot longer, costs being a lot higher. Most of it comes down to, in my view, planning. They're knowable things. The nice thing about med device, the FDA gives you pretty darn good guidances on what you should do. There are standards, there are baselines, there are benchmarks. There's a lot of information on what good looks like. Where I see the mistake happen is when a company tries to deviate from what good looks like without justification, usually in the form of they didn't know that was the thing they should do, and they just kind of blew by it until they get surprised. Here at Avio, we can help you with that. There are lots of other good people who also can. I would implore you, get the help. Figure out the plan early on. You'll still make some mistakes, but you'll probably make fewer. And with that, I'll stop talking at you and just stop sharing and take any questions that people might have. And just as a reminder again, you'll get a recording afterwards, and you can always reach out if you have more questions or want to talk about it more. Excuse me. What was that? So if you have any questions, just throw them in the chat. And if you don't have questions, hey, that is a-okay. You can always reach out separately or ask them later. Scott, I see you got a question. What's up? Yeah, folks, you do got to type them into the chat. Yeah, we have it set so the video and the muting won't come off because on the webinars, we quite often get people who will forget they're off mute, and have had some situations before. So if you have a question, just type it in the chat. All right. Folks, hearing no questions, I'm going to let you go. I will say thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us today. You'll get a recording. Oh, here we go. Can you provide more detail on the 30 million? So I'm assuming that's referring to the average 510K cost. Yeah, so that average is looking at the cost to go from concept to 510K clearance on average. Data set comes from a whole bunch of different places. It's basically looking at product development costs, testing costs, clinical costs if appropriate, regulatory, legal, IP, staff, like fully burdened costs. And what ends up driving it up a fair bit, I would say, is there are a lot of companies that, not a lot, I should say, there are a good number of companies who, when they're planning a 510K, don't plan the things and run into unexpected developments, or it doesn't work in testing and now they've got to retest, do redesigns, and the cost can scale pretty quickly. Got one from Aaron asking, how do you advise customers on the timeline to develop, to make tools, to assembly line such? Oh yeah, getting the manufacturing stuff in order. Um, I've observed if a company hasn't done manufacturing or worked with a manufacturer before, it's a whole different world from the R&D, from the development world, different systems, different skill sets, different people. I would advise early on building relationships. Most of the CMs, if they're not startup focused, they're looking for high volume. Manufacturing runs on volume. Even if they're low volume, they want high volume for their stage. Find manufacturers who specialize in startup companies, build relationships, learn from them. The salespeople will help you to understand that world so that when you're ready to do prototype manufacturing, pilot manufacturing, they want to be there to help because they want the business. They'll share knowledge that will help you think through and solve those problems. Uh, got a question asking, can you elaborate practical ways we can ensure successful conversion of our clinical pilots to first customers? So handful of things. One, have that discussion as part of the pilot discussion. Hey, we want to do a pilot because we know there's value and we want to prove it. If we prove it, can we move to commercial terms? Here's what commercial terms would look like. Let's start a conversation around those. Don't wait until after the pilot's completed to start a conversation on commercial terms. Second, make sure you understand their process for buying whatever it is. I see far too many companies that they wait until they're actually selling to learn how a product or a service is bought by that provider. Do they have a VAC? What's their financial model? How do they make decisions if it's above a certain dollar level? Are you capital or are you just supplies? What sort of stocking requirements do they have? Understand those things before you're going in. And yes, there's variability from client to client, but there often are industry norms. And if you can understand them, you can build the forms, you can train the people, you can simplify your processes. Uh, So then a question from Niall asking, the subject of 510K versus de novo, will this ultimately be stipulated and decided by the FDA, or does the company have the ability to tell the FDA which one it will fit into? Well, the FDA publishes wonderful guidances on what a 510K and what a de novo are applicable to. You can review those and then make an argument that your product is one or is the other. And in the Q submission process, right, the FDA, they'll listen to you and give their view on what that is, right? You can do formal requests, but that's not as common. But in most cases, a company makes an analysis based on the claims they want to make, the product they want to bring to market. And if they're unsure about it, they'll do a Q submission with the FDA to ask about, hey, we think it's a 510K. Here's why. Do you agree? Let's see. Any other questions? Scott, I see your hand still up? If you want to call me afterwards, or you said like, or this is maybe your keyboard's not working. Let's see if I missed any questions. I think that is all the questions. I'll give 1 second for any last questions.
Yes, Frank, this is Scott. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I am so sorry. It would not allow me to type. I've never encountered that error. It said I needed to enter the chat in order to type. I don't know how I could be here without being in the chat.
Right
Um,
on.
this was wonderful as expected. Frank, thank you so much for everything you're doing for your company, for Medtech, for the state of Minnesota. Continue to be impressed. I am making a trip next week to finalize becoming the CEO of a startup. One of the
Wonderful.
first things,
Congrats.
I appreciate that. I'm not sure that congratulations are appropriate in this case. It's going to be a tough road, but I'm eager for it and I'm aligned with the mission. One of the first orders of business would be to decide whether I move the headquarters from St. Louis, Missouri to Minnesota, to the Twin
Hmm.
Cities. I am definitely a fan, the network, I have their ear. But if you were to make your top pitches for how do you select where you set up the headquarters of a new rising hiring startup, and then maybe what are the top virtues of Minnesota, which I know you are very steeped in.
Yeah. So I give you two answers. If it's truly a startup, like early stage, headquarters location, I think is less important than, say, CEO location, because increasingly companies are hybrid, virtual, remote, things like that. So one answer is it doesn't matter as much. If you're a company that's going to be hiring a number of people, you're going to be scaling, or you need to have that core team in one place, then I would argue being in a medical device hub has its advantages in finding people, being close to suppliers that are specialized in all of that. And of course, if you're in med device, it's hard, I would argue, hard to beat Minnesota. If you weren't in Minnesota, you might be Southern or Northern California, or maybe Boston, although Boston's been so dominated by biotech, that's harder and harder. So I'd say it depends on the stage of the company and what you're trying to do. As far as the virtues of Minnesota for med device, I would argue one, it's density, like not just volume of people, but the density, right? They're geographically concentrated. They know each other because of they've often worked at a Medtronic, a Boston, an Abbott, a Solventum. And then second, the density of the supply chain. There's highly, highly specialized suppliers of every type. And all of that means you can find people who have been there, done that, made the mistakes, and you can find suppliers who have made the mistakes too. You put them together, and the data actually shows you can move faster. Um, there's data that is shown in PMA products. A Minnesota address is 6 months faster to first PMA than anywhere on earth, controlling for company size. And then a 510K is about 30 days faster. Same thing, controlling for company size. So that density is a real material advantage to time and cost to market.
If I may be greedy and ask one more follow-up question, I was not aware of that timeline. That will be a compelling arrow to have in my quiver. So I thank you. And I may have missed comments along this in the beginning. I did take your advice, essentially, which I heard right now, and reached out to 20 people in my LinkedIn network. How amazing is it that we live in an era where we can do that through LinkedIn and
Yeah.
catch up to people we worked with 10 years ago, 20 years ago? And as I asked them about the biggest pitfalls, they did mention a bunch of the things that you said, sage advice. But if I was to summarize, number one was fundraising, 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 and after that, fundraising.
Yep.
Uh,
Job
any
of a
advice you
startup
haven't shared on the
CEO is
call yet in terms
fundraising.
of uh, the most common mistakes that CEOs or leadership or startups make in not approaching fundraising in the right way? I think there's great patents and unmet needs, all of the things align, but that won't matter if the funds don't bring it to market.
Yeah. So we do a whole set of presentations on this very topic for that reason. The single piece of like commentary, I would not call it advice, but commentary I'd make. Um, I think a lot of people, if they haven't done it before, they mistake truth and perception. Um, Investors in medical and startups are betting on a future, right? They're betting on what if this works. It's not an objective fact that it will work. It's not an objective fact that it is a good idea and it will get adopted. So, what the investors are betting on is, do I believe that you, as leader of this company, will be able to create a return, right? So a lot of startups, like they work on the IP, they work on the deck, they work on the technology, which is important, and then they forget to work on themselves, their knowledge of investment terms, how they pitch, how they present, how they show up, their competency about commercialization, right? The investors, unless they know your specific technology, they're going to have a hard time doing true diligence on it. What they're actually going to do is they're going to look at that CEO and look at that team and go, do I believe this person could make me money? Yes. Okay, here you go. I'm not sure. They'll wait for the next investment. So truth versus perception, right? It's the investor's money. They have to believe you can do good with it. And that is not a fact. That is a belief. Yeah. Oh, I see some good chats. And Nicole, thank you so much for dropping those articles in there. I appreciate that. One more last call, questions, comments, throw them in. And folks, again, you'll get the recording and you can always reach out to set up a call or ask questions. Client or not, I am always at your service. So is the whole ABO team. Lynn had asked, yeah, about FDA clearance. Um, Data is showing that the clearances are taking a little bit longer, still within reasonable numbers. On AI, I haven't seen breakout specifically for like AI related clearances or approvals if those are taking longer. Um, what I've seen in projects involving AI is that we're kind of all figuring it out. It's not as well defined as other areas of med tech. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's more complexity um, or if it takes longer, but I haven't seen data specific to that. Yeah, that's a good one. I think we're all wondering, right? Um, Folks, I think that's a good spot to wrap it up. Great questions. I appreciate you all taking time out of your day, and I appreciate you working in this wonderful industry and being part of the community. If I can ever help you or any of your colleagues, you know where to find me. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.